I don't know. Test it.
Hello.
Push the button and see what happens.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Push it and hold it and see what happens. All right, yours is not hot. Let's go ahead and... Can we have Steve's mic hot too, please? I don't know if the folks out at the vending area told anyone or reminded you that even though they're selling some beverages and snacks and stuff, there's none allowed in the auditorium. So anyone who has a drink or a snack, please refrain from opening it and drinking it out here, please. Thanks.
Are you going to allow applause?
I
hope not.
No. Generally, we do not. Everyone else got the message too. This is directed at the audience in the house. We don't allow, other than, when we say hello, you can maybe give some applause, that sort of thing. But please do not applaud or boo or use noisemakers or anything like that during the course of the debate. We ask that the audience watch and see but not be heard throughout the debate, and we appreciate your indulgence in that. We know that many of you probably are supportive, maybe close friends, family members of the candidates, but please refrain from showing your joy when they're speaking or your displeasure when others are speaking. A quick word on the format. I think that most of the candidates are aware of our format, but I'll go over it again. Everything's based on the rule of 1 minute. There are clearly visible time clocks here that will count down the minute. That's opening statements. You'll each have a minute. You'll each have a minute to answer the initial question. Then we'll have a discussion phase where it's not really timed, but because of that, I'm going to be very restrictive on how long I'm going to allow any one candidate to speak during that period. Because frankly, we only have a few minutes for a discussion phase. So I'd encourage the candidates to maybe try and get my attention if there's a point they'd like to make, if they'd like to leap into a conversation. It's my belief to allow a conversation sort of to happen. That's sort of what we're here for, is to explore differences between you. But if I see a candidate trying to use the entire 3 minutes, you can anticipate that I'll be cutting you off fairly quickly. Then we'll move on to the next question. And because Governor King will begin the opening statements, Senator Dill, you'll begin the first question, and therefore we'll move down the line. Everything will move left to right as well. And we'll have a minute for closing statements as well. And we will have a lightning round. Everyone's familiar with the lightning round, right? Yeah.
Yes.
All right, good.
No one really abides by it.
Everyone loves the lightning round. Yeah, exactly.
That's the most fun.
One-word answer, which turns into 2 sentences, but that's all right.
Oh, is yours wild? Oh, yeah, mine's a little wildly. What?
Getting tips from the audience.
I think we're about 6 minutes away or so. Oh, for the candidates, the three on the left-hand side, when you want to look directly into the camera, Mike, put your hand in the air.
Okay.
That will be your camera. Okay. I realize it's not the easiest thing to see given the lighting scheme, but that'll be your headshot camera. If at any point you want to look for your openings or closings directly into a camera, that's for you. The candidates on the right-hand side, stage right, I think it is, or maybe it's stage left. Anyway, the three of you, your camera will be, you're on the left, your camera will be on the left.
2. Okay. We can do that.
I have. Matt spoke to me through the IFB momentarily. Matt, can you speak to me again, just so I can double-check my IFB? Matt Curran? Yeah, I can hear you. Good.
Excuse me.
Oh, I'd say maybe 15, something like that. 15, 20.
This is
Yep.
beginning Monday night at 7, by the way.
Oh, thanks.
15, 20.
Phone's off.
And less than 5 away. Again, I'll repeat, for those who don't know, this will be streaming live, and I'll say it in a moment, at WGME.com and at PressHerald.com. our debate co-sponsors. It will be on television, but due to CBS having a triple-header football matchup today that we found out about relatively late, this will actually be on television Monday night at 7 p.m., which is a fairly high-profile spot, frankly. 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. on CBS 13. So prime access the night before the election is a pretty auspicious spot, I guess.
And before Monday night.
Yes.
Do I have time
That's
to
right.
tweet out the fact it's on GME time right now?
Don't rush it, get to it.
Okay, I've just tweeted it out that it's on WGME.com on main politics, so it should know now.
There you go. Did you find Wi-Fi in the building?
No, I just did it via
All right. About 3 minutes away or so. Any last-minute questions any of the candidates may have about the format, about anything going on? Or you all have waters, I believe?
Yes, we do.
Excellent.
Phones ring.
There will be no commercial breaks, no interruptions of any kind once we begin. So hopefully my decision to have a 48-ounce soda about an hour ago was not a bad one. Right now? Okay, thank you. 5:01, all right. Again, it'll be roughly a 57, 58-minute debate for those wondering. That's to accommodate the television schedule on Monday night.
How's your son?
He's doing well.
Good.
I think he's here tonight.
Oh, good.
Actually, both.
I can't see anybody out there.
This is the worst bit of the whole debate. Waiting for everything to start.
You guys are being really quiet. Wow.
They took my instructions to heart. I'm very
I'll say.
gratified.
I thought they'd all left.
It's that authoritative.
Yeah,
presence.
that's right.
Yes.
Steve, are you asking all the hard questions?
Yes. No softballs.
I'm scared.
Beautiful.
And Steve and I will alternate asking questions, but Steve does have the ability to get my attention on it and interject a follow-up question if he sees the need. Hey, Matt, what's the out cue on the open? Good evening and a warm welcome to you all, to the candidates, of course, to those who are at home right now, maybe listening in your car, to our live audience here at Lewiston Middle School, and a big thanks to Lewiston Middle School for hosting us this evening. I am Greg Lagerquist. This is a debate presentation, a joint presentation of CBS 13 and our media partners, the Portland Press Herald and News Radio 560 WGAN. I'd also like to introduce Steve Missler from the Portland Press Herald. He'd be assisting me in asking the questions here tonight from our media partners, the Portland Press Herald. Steve, thanks so much.
Thanks, Greg.
I want to start by saying how much I respect and admire all 6 of the candidates who are up here tonight because of their willingness to step up and serve. I think it's clear, at least to me, that they love the state of Maine, they love the nation. They just have a deep disagreement on many issues about how to get the nation's problems solved. And it's our job over the next hour to try to explore those differences. So again, thanks to the candidates for joining us. A quick word on the debate we have here tonight, sort of the rule of one. We have 1 minute for opening statements. Each candidate will have 1 minute to answer each question, followed by a rebuttal and discussion period. We then will have a lightning round, a series of quick yes or no, generally, answers and questions, followed by 1 minute each for closing statements from the candidates. We drew a random lots before the debate here to determine the order in which they would appear and speak to you. So let's go ahead and get right to it. Our opening statements. We begin with former Governor Angus King. You have 1 minute, please.
Thanks, Greg. When Senator Olympia Snowe announced her retirement this past winter, she didn't say that she wanted to spend more time with her family or travel or try other pursuits. What she gave was a stinging rebuke to the operations of Congress itself. She said Congress was broken. It didn't work. She couldn't get anything done. And even with 34 years of seniority, with experience, with relationships, with membership in a major political party, integrity, work ethic, all the qualities that she had, she left in sheer frustration. As I was traveling today throughout southern Maine with a group of friends going to stores and restaurants, the most common comment I got from people was, why can't they work together? Why can't they solve the country's problems? Why can't they compromise and talk with each other? And it was in that context that I decided to run for this office because I believe we need to try a different way, a new way, an independent way to move this country forward.
Thank you so much. And now to State Senator Cynthia Dill.
Thank you, Greg. Good evening. My name is Cynthia Dill. I'm the Democratic nominee for the United States Senate. And I got in this race before Olympia Snowe decided to step down because then and now I believe that it's time for a new generation of leadership. The problems in Washington are extreme politics on the one hand and extreme wealth on the other. And what I see in my opponents in this race are more of the same. We have extreme politics and extreme wealth. What we need to do to really turn things around is send a new generation to Washington. We need more women, we need younger people, we need racial diversity, we need people who are in touch with the challenges of ordinary Americans. So what I offer, unlike any other candidate in this race, is a middle-class working mother who knows what it's like to shop at a grocery store, who has a track record of bipartisan work, put the interests of Maine people ahead of my own personal endeavor. And so while I applaud Governor King for stepping out of retirement and finishing up his resume with a nice seat in the Senate, I think the last thing we need is more of the same. We need a new generation of leadership, and I look forward to serving.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And now we move on to Secretary of State Charlie Summers. You will have 1 minute.
Greg, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you this evening and talk about the issues I think that are of critical importance to this country. You know, it took our nation more than 2 centuries to accumulate $8 trillion in debt and less than a decade to double that to $16 trillion. We are on a course in this country that is absolutely unsustainable. I think the choices that will be made on November 6th, next Tuesday, are very clear. You can choose someone like Governor King, who took a $300 million surplus, increased spending by 51%, and left us with a $1.2 billion deficit and the highest tax burden in the country. Or you can choose someone like me, who wants to go to Washington and lead the fight to cut spending, reduce regulations, and keep taxes low so that businesses can grow, so that working people in this state, farmers, truck drivers, nurses, can feed their families, pay their mortgage, and send their kids to school. I grew up in a small family business. I've run my own businesses. I've served in Iraq, Afghanistan, and I think my life experience is very similar to most Mainers. And I hope that when you go to make your decision that you will choose me, because I would like to serve you in the United States Senate.
Thank you very much. We now go to Danny Dalton. Mr. Dalton, you'll have 1 minute as well.
Hi, good evening. What I'd like to say is I've got 25 years of federal government experience in a lot of different agencies that probably could comprise about 50% of our discretionary budget. the reason I'm running is because of the mismanagement and gross incompetence that's been exhibited by our two parties. The best way to address that is by electing independents so that we can hold our Congress accountable for not doing what they're supposed to be doing, and also the fact that they're being controlled by large, powerful interests and lobby groups such as the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and big pharmaceutical groups that are undermining our reform efforts in critical areas like our health care reform and and also Wall Street. And I think the way we can do that is by making sure that we have an independent in there that isn't taking the money from these groups in order to undermine the problems that are in Congress at this time.
Thank you so much. We now go on to Mr. Dodge. Andrew Ian Dodge, you'll have 1 minute as well.
Yes, hello. I come down to closely what Cynthia Dill is looking for. I'm a quarter Quebecois. I'm proud of my Quebec roots. I'm the youngest in the race, and I'm also a writer, so I'm certainly not a millionaire. Now, one of the frustrations I've found in this race so far is there are a lot of major issues which affect the Senate, which haven't been discussed. It's more about moaning about coverage in the media and outside PACs and this and that, and we're ignoring those things that really matter. How about, for instance, why don't we talk about auditing the Fed, that organization which has a huge influence on our day-to-day life and our economy? Or how about things like Fast and Furious, the Syria debacle, and other aspects of foreign policy, which is something that the Senate has remit on. This is really, really a problem. And how about the fact that we're discussing that Senator Snowe dropped out because she's frustrated? No, she probably dropped out because her husband is under investigation for a huge fraud with an organization called EDMC. Let's talk about the real issues, please.
Thank you so much. And now we go to Yarmouth Town Councilor Steve Woods. You'll have 1 minute as well, Mr. Woods.
Thank you, Greg. I'm not a politician. I'm a parent. I'm a business owner. I'm chairman of my local town council. I don't have a campaign staff other than my 13-year-old daughter, who's doing a pretty good job. I'm in 8th place right now, so that could be debatable. But I do have a passion for Maine, and I do have a passion for these United States. On November 6th, if you are a Republican that is married to your ideology, please vote for my good friend Charlie Summers. Likewise, if you're a Democrat that are locked into the ideology and the philosophy of the Democratic Party, the choice is clear. You must vote for Cynthia Dill. The last U.S. Senate, over a 2-year period, cast 688 votes. If you want your next U.S. Senator to weigh each and every vote based on its merit and vote on what's best for Maine or what's best for the country, then please consider one of the qualified independent candidates here tonight. We the people own our democracy. We the people must listen to our better angels in search of the common good. Thank you.
And that concludes our opening statements. Let's go ahead and get right to the questions. I want to welcome in Steve Mistler from the Portland Press-Herald to ask the first question.
Thanks, Greg. Our first question is about jobs. Many voters have identified the economy and a lack of jobs as a primary concern of theirs in this election. Describe in detail your big idea or ideas that you think are going to turn this around, and please be specific about how you're going to create jobs with this idea of yours.
And we begin with Senator Dill.
Well, that's the question I think that everyone in this election is grappling with, and I am in this race because I believe what we need to do for jobs is to invest in infrastructure projects. We have crumbling roads and bridges, and we could put people to work designing and building the infrastructure that we need to run a sound economy. We need to retrain workers and invest and engage in education from day one through adult education. Infrastructure, education, as well as coming together to spend resources on research and development. There was an American Jobs Act that I will certainly support. It's a bill that was presented and unfortunately defeated in today's Congress. I believe that, unlike Mr. Woods, that it's not the two-party system. We have an extremist group of Republicans who are bent on blocking progress. The jobs bill would have produced 1 million jobs, and it was defeated. I will support the president. I will support the jobs bill. I will support the Veterans Jobs Court. There are solutions in Washington. It's just there aren't the votes. And so we need people with the political courage to put people ahead of ideology and corporate special interests.
Thanks so much. We go to Charlie Summers, please.
Well, sure. Steve, I don't think that the government creates jobs. I think that we create an atmosphere where jobs can flourish. And I think the first thing that we need to do is get our spending under control, and then we need to reduce regulations, and we need to begin paying our debt down and doing things to grow our way out of the economy so that businesses can expand, so they can hire people, so that they can, those people can in turn feed their families and pay their taxes. But I think one of the most important things we could do right out of the gate is begin approving some of these energy projects here in the United States. I'm talking about looking for domestic energy, coal, oil, gas, nuclear power. Put people to work in those things. That's, I think, a critical economic issue. It's a national security issue, and we need to put people to work with American solutions, and that's exactly what I'll do as a United States Senator.
Thank you very much. Mr. Dalton, same question to you, please.
Well, I agree with what the two candidates here are saying with regards to the problems that this country is facing and the possible solutions. But the real problem that we're facing in this country is the two parties. Okay, the two parties are the problem. These issues that we are facing are the results of the two parties not doing their job over decades. If we don't address that problem, then none of these issues are going to go away. And the best way to do that is to make sure you have somebody in there that can hold these two parties accountable. Okay, they're not being held accountable. They have to be removed in numbers that allow them to move forward based on the fear that they will have that somebody else is going to take their place. And that's why, like Steve said, we have to put an independent in there. And if we put several independents in here and get rid of somebody like Susan Collins, who isn't doing her job with trying to secure this nation and not even upholding her oath to to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States against foreign and domestic enemies, which I try to bring to the table, then we're not going to get anywhere.
And Mr. Dodge, same question to you about jobs.
It's a very simple solution. It's called lower taxes, get the government the hell out of the way, stop bailing out companies that are going broke and are mismanaged and corrupt, end the stimulus, which was a complete failure. And we also have to have specifics. The problem with the two-party people up here is that they don't talk about specifics. Charlie wants to cut regulation and cut waste and everything else. Well, we need to know what that plan is. I have a plan. It's on my website, and as everybody says, and I name 5 agencies that need to go and are a waste. I mean, one that's very simple. It bothers anybody who travels. The TSA should be privatized immediately. That's one simple solution. We need to have solutions. We need to stop with the platitudes, stop with the bloviating, get down to brass tacks. What will you cut, how you save it, and how you get this country back on its feet. Words are not enough anymore.
Mr. Woods, the same question about jobs to you, please.
Thank you. As I think the only candidate here that owns 6 companies and employs close to 100 people in Maine, I have a unique and important perspective on this. I don't think the next U.S. Senator can create jobs any more than I think the President of the United States should be held accountable for that. I think government policy plays a big role, but I think at its core, people have to change. Government provides infrastructure, provides investment. Education is the key. We're standing here tonight in Lewiston Middle School. It used to be Lewiston High School, about 80 years old. You drive through Lewiston, you see a proud community that was based on manufacturing and textile. That's changing. There's still many jobs here. This is a proud city with hard-working, dedicated people. The jobs of the future, they're inside my iPhone. Not literally, but in terms of how commerce will work, in terms of our global connectivity. Nobody calls 411 for information. Very few people go to bookstores or go to record stores. Commerce, communication, and interconnectivity is happening in the future electronically. We need to move in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And the final answer on this to Governor King.
Greg, this was the issue when I first ran for governor, and it was the main reason I ran, and it was what I spent 24 hours a day, 365 days a year for 8 years doing. We had a pretty good result. The state of Maine added about 70 to 75,000 new net jobs over that 8-year period. That's 165 or 70 jobs week in and week out for 8 years. What I learned was there's no silver bullet. There's no single thing you can do to create jobs. There's silver buckshot. There's a lot of things you can do. And it goes from everything on the federal level, like trade policy, which now threatens 900 jobs at New Balance here in Maine, education and skills training. We have something like 49 different job training programs administered by 9 agencies. That's got to be improved. Rural broadband is a big issue for Maine. and rural states throughout the country. If you don't have broadband in your rural community, that's an economic death sentence. So there's a whole series of things. Education, R&D is part of it. And I agree, the government doesn't create jobs. It creates an atmosphere where jobs can be created, and that's exactly what we did.
I'm going to go ahead and extend Secretary of State Summers' time. We heard Andrew Ian Dodge say, what's your specific plan? Let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and ask you. Steve Mistler did ask for specifics as well. You seem to be challenged to give us an example of a regulation you would cut, for example.
Oh, regulation that I would cut. I think I would start, the first thing I would cut would be in terms of energy production. I would make sure the pipeline is coming into this country so that it would provide not only needed energy supplies, but provided needed jobs.
And Senator Dill, I think you indicated you want to jump in on that as well.
Well, I just want to challenge all of these so-called independents to present what their alternative is to the two-party system. I mean, it's not great, but what is it's not great compared to what?
Mr. Dalton,
we're going to have a coalition government?
Obviously, I'm going to have to address that. Okay, because here's what the two-party system is. It's too big to fail. Okay, the two-party system is controlling the press. It's being controlled by major lobby groups like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, who's funding these campaigns. That is the same group that's undermining our reform, specifically health care and immigration reform, which nobody talks about. We haven't had one question on immigration reform. And what an independent does is goes into Congress and holds the two parties accountable for not getting along. The people that are in the two parties that want to move this country forward can do that.
Mr. Dodge, do you agree with what he said?
And also, the people of Maine can get rid of an independent easier than they can get rid of these two parties.
All right, thanks so much,
The
Mr.
fundamental
Dodge.
problem is that in D.C. right now, you have two gangs. It's like the Crips and the Bloods. They control everything. You get there and you're pulled to one side. We need independents to go to D.C. because then they can stand their own 2 feet. You want to be represented as men and women in Maine, you have an independent because they will owe their fealty to you, not to the Republican gang, not to the Democratic gang, and not to anyone else. They're going to be your senator in D.C., not D.C. senator in Maine.
Absolutely. I'm going to go to Mr. Woods here next.
Thank you, Greg. At the end of the day, the United States Senate in any government job is a job. It requires competency, not abstract ideology. The reason why I think an independent is important for this election is because power and money corrupts. And what's happening now in Washington is there's a political industrial complex. If something happened right now in Lewiston, I don't want to suggest a natural disaster, but something happened where it required some quick, urgent thinking. I have great respect for the other 5 candidates. If we threw away the party and the D and the R and we had to decide something happened with the dam and we have to do something, we could figure it out.
And it's
the parties that get in the way.
And Mr. King, your chance to respond to all this.
I think the response is, what about senators who make their decisions based upon the facts, the data, the science, and the best interests of their constituents rather than the interests of a particular party? Parties aren't in our Constitution. Parties aren't anywhere in the early history of this country. George Washington, James Madison, Thomas Jefferson all warned us about parties. If you read George Washington's farewell address, what he said over 200 years ago has absolutely come true.
Mr. Summers, did you want to jump in on that?
Well,
we'll have to probably move on after this.
Sure, but it's nice to hear all these opinions about things, but it doesn't address the issues that the working people of this state are facing. The farmers, the truck drivers, the nurses are wondering how they're going to pay their mortgage. And now we're talking about whether or not a party should be here or a party should not. The only thing that we should be focused on is the issue of making sure that jobs can be provided in this country and people can pay their bills.
Let's go ahead and continue this discussion in the framework of our next question. Let's get to the second question. It is about this, the nation's deficit. We've already started talking about it. The spending is described as a time bomb with the potential to harm the nation even more than any terrorist attack. This year, for every dollar taken in by the federal government will spend $1.50. Congress seems gripped by inaction over the central dispute. Do you fix it with more revenues, less spending, or both? We're going to begin this question with Charlie Summers.
Well, sure. I think you absolutely have to address it with more revenues, but I think the difference in the approach is I would do things to get government off of people's backs, to get it off of businesses' backs so that they can plan, so that we can have a tax system that is predictable. So 5, 10 years down the road, businesses are going to know what their tax liabilities are going to be so they can make decisions on hiring, make decisions on purchasing equipment, and in turn grow our economy. We need to do 2 things. We need to cut spending and put spending on a downward trajectory, and we need to do things to allow businesses to expand, to hire people who can in turn pay taxes and feed their families, and that will put our revenues on an upward projection. We have great differences in this race. One of the key differences between Governor King and myself is Governor King has made a central issue of raising taxes. That's the worst thing that we can do in this economy. We need to keep everybody's taxes low so that this economy can grow. Even President Obama, 2 years ago, advocated for extending the Bush tax cuts because he knew it would throw a wet blanket on the economy if we raise taxes. It's the worst thing that we can do.
And Mr. Dalton, same question. How to defeat the deficit to you, please.
Well, definitely have to address the debt and the wasteful spending that's going on within our government. The reason that we're in this crisis is, again, because of the two parties that didn't regulate properly Wall Street. They deregulated in the late 1990s. They got rid of pay-go. They came up with the Bush tax cuts that put us about $3 trillion in debt. And the way to address that is to have comprehensive tax reform, not this trying to get rid of the loopholes in a piece of Swiss cheese. And they can't get along on any issue, let alone trying to cut the loopholes that everybody has a piece of the pie with. So we just lost 2 wars, okay? Basically, 2 of us in this room could have spent $1 trillion instead of $4 trillion and lost the same 2 wars, saved the country $3 trillion. We need to have an effective government, hold them accountable when they're not doing their job, and they're not doing their job. Thank you.
Mr. Dodge, same question to you, please.
It's a very simple concept. When you cut spending, when you don't have enough money, we're all Mainers. We have common sense. If you're not bringing in as much as you're spending, you cut what you're spending. It's not really rocket science. We have to stop being the world's policeman. We have to stop the bailouts and stimuli of companies that are going to go under anyway. And we also need tax reform, as my friend Danny says. I prefer flat tax. We need to reduce taxes on everyone. We need to reduce the regulation burden on everyone. We are not going to get growth. We're not going to reduce the deficit if we continue to allow the politicians, when they get to D.C., to act like Kardashians on a night out. It just does not work. We need common sense. We need an independent voice, and we need to get it done sooner or later, or we're going to end up being like Greece, Portugal, Spain, et cetera. And I don't think any American wants to go down that road.
Thank you so much. Mr. Woods, to you, please.
I believe it's also simple, but not quite as simple as was just mentioned by Andrea and Dodge. It has to be a combination of revenue, and it has to be a combination of spending cuts. As a person who I think has paid more taxes in the last year than the other candidates combined, I don't want to pay more taxes, and I'm sure my kids are hoping that I don't pay more taxes in terms of their future. But I'm willing to do it. I want to do it. It cuts to the core of a fundamental issue of this election and where we are as a country. We have to be willing to sacrifice. We can talk about accounting, we can talk about the arithmetic, we can talk about the abstract. But at the end of the day, our country is a collective. Whether we look at Maine, whether we look at Lewiston or something, we have to come together. And I am for repealing the Bush tax cuts, even if it means I pay more. I am for doing something. We have to act quickly. The debt is out of control. It's not just an economic issue. It's a national defense issue involving China. And I'm all for being responsible in this area.
Thank you very much. Former Governor King, to you, please.
Certainly raising taxes isn't a centerpiece of my campaign. What is a centerpiece of my campaign is being responsible and being serious about this problem. And the magnitude of the deficit is such that we cannot cut our way out of it entirely. We cannot grow our way out of it entirely. It has to be some combination of severe cuts, revenues, and growth. And I've looked at lots of plans. The most serious one that I've seen is the framework presented by the Simpson-Bowles Bipartisan Commission. I'm proud to say I've been endorsed by both Erskine Bowles, a Democrat, and Alan Simpson, a Republican, in this campaign because they see that a balanced approach has to be done in order to meet this challenge. We just aren't going to be able, we're kidding each other and we're kidding our constituents if we think, this is going to be some easy exercise. The deficit is so serious now that it is a ticking time bomb. It's a national security issue. It's also a severe economic issue, but it's also a moral issue. I don't want to raise taxes, but I also don't want to put the bill through to my children and grandchildren.
Thanks very much. Senator Dill, to you, please.
Well, certainly the debt and deficit is an important problem, and I think it's important to remember what caused it. It was caused in large part by the Bush tax cuts, by the unfunded wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and by the collapse on Wall Street. So what we need to do is address those three major causes. One, the Bush tax cuts need to be repealed, and unlike Angus King and Charlie Summers, I support the President in repealing the Bush tax cuts for families making over $250,000, as well as comprehensive tax reform that would eliminate subsidies to oil and gas and other large corporations. Two, we need to continue to regulate Wall Street. Unlike Governor King and Charlie Summers, I support the Dodd-Frank bill. I can't believe that we would let Wall Street run amok after what it did in 2008. Number three, we need to get a grasp on our military spending. We put Iraq and Afghanistan on a credit card. We need to reduce our military spending. I'm the only candidate in the race who's talking about peace, who's committing to not going to war with Iran. So I would just like to also address briefly the Simpson Bowles, which is a high-minded bipartisan rhetoric, but it balances the budget on the backs of middle-class people. It's this idea that was drawn up by a bunch of rich guys, cuts home mortgage deduction, defunds Planned Parenthood, makes cuts to Social Security, and continues tax cuts for super wealthy people.
I'm going to let Mr. Dodge respond. You said you also been talking about peace.
I'm a libertarian. I've been calling for reducing the military, stop being the world's policeman. I'm against meddling in Syria. We're against meddling in the Libyan escapade with Benghazi, and all the rest of this.
All right,
My apologies, Mr. Dodge.
Steve Mistler wanted to interject a follow-up question to our candidate.
Well, Cynthia Dill, you've already sort of answered this question, but I was curious, sort of a show of hands, and maybe about which candidates support the Simpson Bowles deficit reduction plan, and specifically, which parts of the reduction part do you
Let's go ahead and have a show of hands, if we could. Let's go on a wide shot. Who supports at least elements of the Simpson Bowles plan?
Well, elements of it? Sure, elements of it. I mean, there's something in there for everybody.
That's its entirety? Or?
Let's go ahead with what Steve asked, the entirety. Put your hand up if you favor the entirety of it.
No,
everybody has specific reservations. I support it as a framework and as a serious proposal, and that's what we have to talk about. We can't just talk about we're going to do a few cuts here and a few cuts there. You've got to be more specific, and as a framework, I'm for it.
Charlie Summers, to you.
Well, I think, when Governor King talks about the moral responsibility that we have, I think that is a little high-minded, especially coming from someone who had Record Hill Wind and had $127 million in the bank and yet went to the federal government for $130 million. And he himself has said that 42 cents out of every dollar we spend in this deficit comes from China. I think morally, he's a little bankrupt on that.
I was going to move on, but obviously since there was a direct challenge, your chance to respond to that.
I don't think I need to respond to that.
And Mr. Dalton, you had your hand up. You wanted to say something.
Yeah, we need comprehensive tax reform. That means we have to put everything on the table. When you take a pledge not to raise taxes, you can't do that. My plan, which is I don't come up with these things out of thin air, and I'm not a tax expert, is a value-added tax, which 150 countries have. And what that does is that allows us to take our corporate income tax off the table, which allows us to be globally competitive, which also allows us to take $1 trillion of offshore profits and bring them back into the country. Please take a look at the websites.
Let's go ahead and move on to question 3. We go back to Steve Mistler from the Portland Press-Herald, please.
Thanks again, Greg. This question is more of a personal one, and it gets to your qualities as a leader. The question is, what is your greatest strength that makes you the right choice in this election? And if you wish, please contrast that strength with some of your opponents on the stage.
And I believe we could begin with Mr. Dalton. You, please.
Well, I think everybody here is committed. And I think to be a leader, you have to be committed. You have to stand by your principles. I think I've stayed by my principles over the entirety of my life. I've given everything I've had for 25 years of my life in the defense of this country. And I've taken the last year out of my life just to make sure that the people of Maine and the people of this country know that our representatives here in this state aren't protecting our country. When I see something like Benghazi happen, when it was so simple to allocate our resources properly and take 100 Marines that were sent home from Iraq, the hundreds of thousands of soldiers that were sent home from Iraq, and they didn't have the wherewithal to put 100 Marines in Benghazi to protect those people. I worked in security, providing security in Iraq during the war. I know what it takes. They left those people in danger. The State Department and all these different agencies, they have political agendas, and they're not being controlled. The U.S. Senate's supposed to be confirming responsible leadership. That's a major portion of their job, responsible leadership to run these agencies. They're not doing that, and when they find out, and they should be listening to their constituents, When they find out that they're not, they should be jumping up and down, letting you know so that you don't send your sons and daughters to a war they put you in, and then they'll back you up. Thank you.
Mr. Dodge, to you, please.
Well, I can tell you a few things that I'm not. You won't see me jumping up and down on a veterans memorial like Cynthia Dill did in one of her recent advertisements. I won't take the place of a duly elected delegate to a convention as Charlie Summers did in Tampa, as they refer to him as a scab delegate. And unlike Angus, I would never cavort with Michael Bloomberg, who seems to hate guns and soda in equal measure. The reasons I have some qualities is that unlike many of the other people on this stage, I do have 2 degrees in politics, and I hope that you don't hold that against me. But instead of going up the greasy pole and being involved in the sordid nature of politics and being dragged back and forth, I've been able to look at it from a point of view as not only academically, but as a political pundit. I know where it's going wrong, and with the advice of a gentleman like Mr. Dalton next to me, who if I become senator, he would be my first call on staff, I will be able to serve the people of Maine and get to the bottom of all this miasma of corruption in D.C.
Thank you very much. To Mr. Woods, please.
Thank you, Greg. One element of leadership I think is important is not blaming everyone else. You see it in sports, you see it in government, and the same dynamic exists. True leaders go out and they compete. They believe in their principles. They're willing to do hard work. And if you look at some of the advertising that have gone on over the last 5 months here in Maine, and you see the claims, you see the distortions, and I'm not going to single anyone out because last night it was a little tense, and I don't want that to happen. But that's leadership, honesty and integrity. The claims that Cynthia Dill keeps making about wealthy, old white men, I think are not only disingenuous, but I think it's awful. You know, and for her to stand for diversity, I think is also disingenuous. Wealth, many times, not always, is connected to competency. Many times it's connected to hard work. I've been working since I've been 13. I've been successful. And I haven't done it by myself. I've done it with good people, and I've also done it with the help of the government providing infrastructure. So I resent some of the claims that were made by Cynthia Dill earlier. Thank you.
Thank you so much. To you, former Governor King, please.
Half a block from my house is the home of Joshua Chamberlain, and practically every day I either walk or drive by it. And as I reflect on his life and the experiences that he had both in the Civil War at Bowdoin and as governor of Maine, the qualities that come through are vision, a vision for what our society can and should be, the passion to make that happen, to make the vision realized, but also a quality of listening and empathy. And he demonstrated that throughout his life. So I would say those 3 qualities of vision, passion to make that vision a reality, but empathy and sensitivity and listening to other people, I think, contribute to that, and that's the model I've always tried to follow.
Thank you. Senator Dill, to you, please, as well.
Well, thank you. That's a great question. When I think of leaders that I admire, Margaret Chase Smith comes to mind because she had the courage to speak truth to power, and I have that trait. I do have the courage to speak truth to power, and I've demonstrated that throughout my life. When I think of Ed Muskie, another revered Maine senator, he brought us the Clean Water Act and Clean Air Act, and like Ed Muskie, I'm a believer that we need to protect our environment. And unlike Angus King and Charlie Summers, I don't support the Keystone Pipeline. I don't believe hydrofracking is the future. And like George Mitchell, who brought peace to Ireland, I'm a peace candidate. I believe that we can resolve our conflicts without going to war unnecessarily. I would have stormed the beaches of Normandy, but I don't believe in aggression around the world or using our military unresponsibly. And like Olympia Snowe, I am a true independent. I don't believe that you can't belong to a party and have independent thoughts. I think that's just defied by history. And with respect to wealthy, older white men, I have nothing against them, but they are well represented in the United States Senate. There are only 17 women in the United States Senate. 2/3 of today's Senate are millionaires. There's not a single black person. There's not a single Native American. It's time that we brought a new generation of leadership to Washington, one that reflects the population. So it's too bad that some people are offended by that, but that's speaking truth to power.
Thank you so much. Oh, Mr. Woods. Mr. Summers hasn't had a chance
Cynthia,
to respond.
you're not a Native American.
Mr. Woods, Charlie Summers hasn't had a chance to respond. Your question to you, Mr. Summers.
Thank you, Greg. I grew up in a small family business. My mother and father ran an old hotel, a restaurant, and a bar, and we dealt with all kinds of people coming in and out of that. And I looked at my mother and father, and what they taught us was to treat people with respect and to treat people the way that you wanted to be treated. You know, I had a lot of opportunities as a young man, and one of the ones I remember the most was when I met Senator Everett McKinley Dirksen of Illinois, and he was someone who I looked up to and someone I try to model myself after. He was a leader. He was someone who believed that at the end of the day, you had a responsibility to move the process forward. He did so by enabling the passage of the civil rights legislation with Republican votes in the 1960s. He did it in terms of supporting the president. He was a leader among men, and that's really who I try to pattern myself after, along with my father. You know, he served in the Korean War, my brother, my sister in the Marine Corps. I've served in Iraq, Afghanistan, and I believe that those experiences have given me the leadership experience and qualities to excel in the United States Senate.
Now, we are well over. Mr. Woods, I was going to say that she had a chance to respond to you a moment ago, and I was not going to have rebuttal time since she did respond to you, but is there something more you'd wanted to say?
Yeah, and again, I don't want to personalize this, but Cynthia keeps bringing this up. She's 47 years old, but she talks about young people, African Americans, Native Americans. As an attorney in Cape Elizabeth, I just think it's disingenuous. I think each of us should stand here and just tell our qualifications as opposed to being critical or demeaning other people's.
Obviously, Senator Dill, your chance to respond.
Thank you for proving my point that we don't need more rich, white men in the United States Senate. I'm sorry that you disagree. We can just agree to disagree. How's that for bipartisanship?
Let's continue to explore these issues in our fourth question. Let's move on. That it involves energy. Hurricane Sandy reminds us all how much we frankly depend on reliable, accessible, affordable energy for our lives, our homes, our vehicles, our jobs. Yet, even without a superstorm to remind us, there is concern about the nation's long-term energy supply and energy independence issues. What energy policies do you support to solve this problem? We begin with you, Mr. Dodge.
There's some very simple solutions that we should have been getting on board a long time ago. Open up ANWR, stop meddling in the Gulf, and allow those wells to come back online. We also have a president who's limited vastly drilling on public lands while it has gone up on private lands. I believe that we should look into things like turbine power in the water, rather than destroying the various hills and mountains we have in Maine. And also things like we should stop funding Fisker automobiles that when they touch salt water, they burst into flames and practically burn down half of the docks in New Jersey. We need to be careful about how we spend taxpayers' money on alternative energy. It shouldn't be about what the sexiest, what the coolest thing, or what the way one of our politicians can get a backhander and make some money. It should be about our future. We should stop buying oil from the Middle East and do it here. We have more oil than we need. Let's get to it.
Mr. Wood, same question to you about energy, please.
Thank you. I think both climate change and the energy question are interconnected. And climate change is also an element that it really does distinguish the partisan element. 90% of Republicans don't believe in climate change. Conversely, about 90% of Democrats do. I happen to be a fan of science, and sitting in an academic institution, I think we should honor that. It's science. I believe in gravity. I believe in climate change. I believe in isotopes from millions of years ago pointing to climate change. Relative to energy, we need to do all of the above. This isn't a simple question of who will do something about gas prices. We're on a planet. We're on the Earth. We only have a finite amount of fossil fuels as we hurl through space. It's not about gas pricing. In the next 100 years to 200 years, it's about human survival. The federal government should be engaged. The federal government should play a role. We shouldn't play politics on something so critical. And people should realize that both climate change connected to Hurricane Sandy, ocean is 5 degrees warmer, polar caps are melting. Let's talk about science and math as opposed to politics.
And the same question to you, former Governor King.
Well, I think the first thing you have to do is admit that there is something called climate change, that it's happening and that humans are contributing to it, and the principal contribution is the combustion of fossil fuel and dumping CO2 into the atmosphere. I think what we need to do in terms of energy is get off of oil as soon as possible. And people talk about drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. At the maximum estimate, that would produce 90 days of world oil supply. I don't think it's worth it from 26 different sites. I think we need to talk about getting off of oil, and the alternative in the interim is natural gas. Hydrofracking is controversial, but I'm told by people who I respect, environmental engineers, that it can be done safely And the environmental benefits are huge because if natural gas, which burns much cleaner, replaces oil and particularly coal, that's an enormous win for the environment. The third step, of course, is renewables. And I believe that we have to continue support for renewables and the R&D necessary to develop renewables because eventually these fossil fuels are going to run out. And at that time, we need the sources to come from wind, solar, tidal, and all the other resources that we have.
Thanks so much. Senator Dill, same question to you about energy, please.
Well, I certainly believe that climate change is happening, and I also agree with my friend Steve that we need to use science and facts and a moral compass to solve our problems, and I would work as Maine's next United States Senator to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. I support the President's increase in the domestic production of oil and gas and think that we have a policy currently in place of all of the above, and that makes sense. We do need to become energy independent, and we need to really put an emphasis on conservation and efficiency. As a legislator, I supported the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which is a carbon tax trading program that has not only reduced carbon in the environment, but has produced money that has been directed to energy efficiency. That's the way to go. In Maine, we can lead in innovative new technologies when it comes to tidal, like ocean renewables in Eastport, when it comes to biomass, when it comes to wind, solar. These are the new technologies. This is the new generation of energy that I think we have to look towards. And unlike Charlie Summers and Angus King, I don't support the Keystone Pipeline. I don't believe hydrofracking is our future.
And Mr. Summers, to you, please.
Well, sure. And, I think the critical thing is that we don't get off on these tangents like we have in supporting alternative energy initiatives, which are many times just picking winners and losers by the federal government. We supported them to the tune of $90 billion last year, yet they produced very little energy. The people in this state want to be able to drive to work and not have it break them. We should be looking for oil, gas, coal. Technology has changed tremendously. These fuels are able to be used more efficiently and more cleanly. And we need to do those things that are going to work, not speculate on things that are not only going to run our debt up more, but they aren't going to provide energy today. We are not going to get ourselves off of oil in 5 or 10 years in this country. We need to pursue a strategy of all the above, I agree, but we have to do things that will make a difference in the next few years, and that is looking for gas and oil in this country, wherever it may be, looking for coal, doing things to expand nuclear options. Those are the things that are going to work. If the French can recycle spent nuclear rods on site, we can do it here in this country.
And Mr. Dalton, the energy question to you, please, as well.
Yes. First of all, I disagree with subsidies, corporate welfare, bought by lobbying groups, which distorts the marketplace and creates an uneven playing field and fosters corrupt relationship between the government and business. And it's anti-consumer and it's anti-constitution in my mind. And like Charlie says, the government has a terrible record at picking winners when it comes to this. For example, our ethanol mandate. What we need to do is prioritize, like Charlie says, and find out, because we are in a crisis, we need to do what we can do immediately to make sure that we can bring down oil prices so that our businesses can be competitive. And the way to do that is make sure we produce as much oil as possible, get the oil into the market. I don't care if the oil goes down to the Gulf and gets sold to other countries, it'll bring the price of oil down. And I agree with Angus King, which we should go to compressed natural gas, expand our refueling stations. We've got a 100-year supply of it. They're coming up with alternative methods of doing dry fracking. And also, we need to make sure that our capabilities in the nuclear energy are left to other countries. It's unsafe. Thank you.
I'm going to go ahead and direct a follow-up to Governor King, former Governor King. There's been a couple of references here tonight. It seems that you somehow unfairly profited from subsidies for wind power projects. Do you care to address what some of the
Sure.
The
project that I worked with was called Roxbury or Wecker Hill Wind out in western Maine. And a couple of important things to know about that project. Number one, it was approved by the town meeting of Roxbury twice by the people of the town. Number two, it has already brought the taxes in that town down 59%. So people's taxes have dropped considerably. Residents of that town are also getting free energy for the life of the project. It got a federal loan guarantee, which is already being paid back. And this is a program that was available nationally. Mr. Summers mentioned the $90 billion. That was a one-time infusion of 1 year that was in the the stimulus package. Only $26 billion of the 90 went to renewable energy. The rest went to a lot of different things like building up the grid, electric cars, and the like. So, and if you compare subsidies, probably the most heavily subsidized energy source in America is nuclear energy. And there's a reason that it's not being built. It is unbelievably expensive, and it requires heavy federal subsidies to even be remotely competitive.
Mr. Summers looked like he wanted to respond to that. I also, Mr. Summers, it seemed like there were a couple of oblique references to climate change science as well, I think implying that you somehow don't believe in climate change science. You want to address that issue as well.
Well, certainly, but first, in response to Angus, he talks about all the wonderful things that they've done for Roxbury in that area, but he does, and then he decries the subsidies for nuclear, but the subsidies for wind energy, it's 22 cents per kilowatt hour is what wind energy costs, and it costs $24 per kilowatt hour in subsidies. At whose expense? At the working people's expense. And when you talk about climate change, do actions by humans have an effect? I'm sure they do. I don't question that at all. But to support things like Governor King supports cap and trade would drive the costs of energy up for the average Mainer. Right now, people are worried about filling their oil tank. They're worried about being able to pay for that, and we're talking about windmills. We've got to get serious about this in this country.
Senator Dill?
Well, Charlie, you brought up the windmill thing. But also you did say at the energy debate that you didn't think that humans made a difference. That I just wanted to point that out. And I would just point out that this conversation about what happened in the 90s or in the past, and this conversation between extreme Republicans and extremely independent, wealthy people is not really relevant to most working Maine people.
Because
I just want to mention that the subsidy, if you calculate the subsidy for wind power, it comes to about 2 cents a kilowatt hour, not 24 cents. So Charlie's off by about a factor of 10.
Well, look, I just want to say something. I listen to these conversations, and it's wonderful for Professor King over here to get up here and talk about this theory and that theory. But there are only two of us on this stage that have served in uniform in this country, right? And only two of us have been in the Middle East, all right? So it's very easy when you're not going over there, and you think of the number of people in this state that we've lost in the Middle East, and when you consider that we're paying the people that we're fighting against right now for our oil, we have a moral responsibility to look for oil and gas and every energy alternative that we have in this country. And to get up here and theorize.
I'm going to give him the final word.
Yes, very short. Carbon trading, it's such a wonderful idea that Al Gore even got out of it, because they tried it in Europe and it was the most corrupt thing that it's been shut down because that's how corrupt it got. It's a wheeze. Carbon trading is not a good idea, and it will only make not so honest people very rich.
I'm ready to move on unless Governor King. Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on. Now we're going to the lightning round. Many people may be familiar with this format. Basically, we ask a series of quick questions designed to get quick answers. We'll go left to right, right to left. Let's get right to it. We've sort of asked this already, so I'm going to move on from the question about climate change to this one. Same-sex marriage in Maine. We'll start with Governor King. How will you vote on Tuesday?
I'm voting yes.
Senator Dill.
I'm voting yes, and I would repeal DOMA.
Secretary of State Summers.
I'm voting no.
Mr. Dalton.
For civil unions, please take a look at my website.
Mr. Dodge.
An emphatic yes, and repeal DOMA.
Mr. Woods.
An emphatic yes, and for same-sex marriage and all human rights.
Should Iran's nuclear capabilities be stopped by any means necessary, Mr. Woods?
I think it's too broad of a question. I think we should be aggressive with Iran. I think it does threaten the U.S. interest.
We've got to move on from that. Mr. Dodge.
Unless we either back Israel when it comes to Iran or get the hell out of the way.
Mr. Dalton.
I got to say this real quick. Iran was, as Charlie knows, Iran was killing our troops when we were in Iraq by the thousands. Okay, we didn't attack Iran then. I don't understand why our Congress and our.
Is that a no?
No, that's not a no. That
What's
is,
the answer?
we should be doing what we need to do when we need to do it.
Okay, thank you, sir. Secretary of State Summers, please.
Well, I think that we certainly should do everything to employ diplomatic efforts, but ultimately we have to protect our own interests.
Senator Dill.
I've forgotten the question because it was so.
Iran, would you step in any means necessary if necessary?
Oh, no, I would not. Any means necessary.
Former Governor King.
You've asked the most complicated foreign relations question in the lightning round.
You like that?
A nuclear-armed Iran is a threat to the entire world, to Israel, of course, and to the rest of the world. I don't think we can let that happen, but right now we're imposing very severe sanctions that seem to be working. That's the path I would follow.
Do you agree? That may have been an error in the lightning round. I'll admit that right now. Do you agree with the following sentence? The Patriot Act, which gave sweeping, unprecedented powers to U.S. intelligence agencies, likely did save lives, Governor King?
I think it probably did.
Senator Dill.
On a lightning round question, the Patriot Act, it was like 2,500 pages.
Did it likely save
passed.
lives or not? What's your opinion on the matter?
Did it likely save lives? I don't have any idea.
Secretary
I think that's.
Well, I would say that we have not had a terrorist attack on American soil since that was passed, and I think it's arguable that it did save lives.
We haven't had a terrorist attack on American soil, not because of our agencies, okay? Because they're totally incompetent. Not totally incompetent, but so incompetent. Well, no, did it save lives? Everything saves lives, but it's unconstitutional.
The Patriot Act is unconstitutional, so it's a too complicated question for a lightning round.
Mr. Woods.
Yes, I do believe it saved lives.
And last question on this. Do you think Olympia Snowe was a good senator for Maine?
Do I think that?
Yes.
I think in the context that over 18 years she had incredible integrity and honor, and so I think in balance she did serve Maine well. And
Let's go with yes or no if we could, please. Mr.
Yes.
Brown.
No.
Mr. Dalton.
Listen, she didn't want, I don't care how long this takes me to say this. Okay. I came back from Iraq. For 2 years, I worked with federal intelligence and law enforcement agencies.
We are losing time out of the closing statement.
Okay, you take it away from my whole closing statement.
Okay.
Because
Please.
our two senators here would not meet with me regarding compelling terrorist information that showed how incompetent the FBI is, the Department of Homeland Security is, all these different agencies that are leaving everybody here unsafe. Okay, now, when I go to Senator Collins' office and I have to meet with their staff, and their staff says go back and talk to these same agencies, that's disgusting. And if you guys vote for Senator Collins in an upcoming election in 2 years, then you're doing this country a great disservice.
She's not here to give a rebuttal. I'm
That's
going to move on
fine.
to Mr.
I
Summers.
could care less.
Yes.
Cynthia Dill.
Absolutely.
And Governor King.
Yes,
But I
Olympia Snowe's been a
did
great
run against
senator.
her. Sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Again, that was an interesting lightning round, to say the least. We're going to go ahead and move on to the closing statements. Again, based on our random drawings, we're going to go ahead and begin with former Governor King. Please, you have 1 minute.
Thank you, Greg.
And actually, maybe a little less, if you would.
All right. Thank you very much. We've talked about a lot of issues tonight. We've talked about energy. We've talked about the economy. We've talked about debt and deficit. But at the beginning, I talked about the broken Congress. And the reason that's a real problem is that it affects our ability to deal with any of those issues. About a month and a half ago, there was a bill on the floor of the United States Senate to provide jobs to 20,000 veterans. The bill failed 58-40. It got 58 votes. The reason it didn't pass, it was being filibustered. Why was it being filibustered? The most likely reason I've heard was that it was the Republicans in the Senate didn't want President Obama to have a legislative victory close to the election. That is a terrible way to make decisions in the United States Senate. What about the veterans? That's the way we should be making the decisions, not based upon party, not based upon who's going to win or who's going to lose the next election. And I would like very much to have your support to give me the honor of serving this state as your United States Senator.
Thank you so much. Senator Dill, to you, please.
Well, thank you very much, Greg. It's been a wonderful opportunity to be here. I'm excited about Election Day. I love Election Day. So much is at stake in this election, and Maine people have a choice. The New York Times recently described this race as a race between Michael Bloomberg and Karl Rove, and I would just like to offer Maine people a different choice, someone who actually would represent you and your family, someone who's not connected with special interests, someone who hasn't taken millions and millions of dollars in super PAC money and out-of-state spending. So there are problems in Washington, but the system isn't broken for people like Angus King. The system works just great for him. The system is broken for 99% of Maine families, people who can't find a job, people who don't have access to health care, people who can't afford higher education. I'm in this race because I'm aware and in touch with the challenges of you and your family. I haven't taken out-of-state billions of dollars from money. I haven't been bought and sold. I'm not strings attached to special interests. I'm not an extremist Republican. I'm not an extreme wealth. I'm not part of the plutocracy. That's the problem. We need a new generation of leadership. I'd love to have your vote. I will represent you. I pledge to work across the aisle and to put you and your family ahead of my own partisan ideology or my own political aspirations.
Thank you very much. Secretary Summers, to you, please.
Greg, I appreciate the opportunity to be with you tonight and discuss the issues that are important not just to Mainers but to our country. I mentioned in my opening statement that the choice is very clear on November 6th, next Tuesday. It's a choice between someone like Governor King, who took a $300 million surplus and turned it into a $1 billion debt and left us with the highest tax burden in the country, or someone like myself, someone who's served my country. I've served in Iraq, Afghanistan, and I'm a proud veteran. And I'm asking you for your support. I believe that the things that we need to do in Washington are to get spending under control, to reduce our debt, and to reduce regulation so small businesses across Maine can expand and hire people so they can have jobs to feed their families. Those are the critical issues, and I believe I have the depth and breadth of experience to be an effective United States Senator. I'm asking you for your support because I look at this opportunity to serve in the United States Senate as another opportunity to serve my country, not a political party. We need people who are willing to stand up and make tough decisions, and I'm willing to lead that fight. I'm asking for your support next Tuesday. I would like to serve as your United States Senator.
Mr. Dalton, you chose to give your summation in the lightning round, but I still would like to give you another extra 10,
Well,
20
thank
seconds.
you so
please.
much. And I apologize if I've become a little bit too passionate there. And I'd like to thank everybody here, and I'd like to thank you so much for allowing me to speak. I love this country. Obviously, I spent a lot of my time trying to protect it. And I'd like to just make sure that the people that are protecting us are as safe as possible and being represented here. The ones that get us into a war should be representing us. I would like to say a little prayer for everyone and for our country and for the state of Maine, and I'll just say it now. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. God bless everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. Dodge, to you, please.
I find it desperately amusing that Senator Dill and Summers are now saying how independent they will be when they get to D.C. Maybe that's because neither of them have been endorsed by their presidential candidates, and both of them have their party apparatus from D.C. running away from them. Fundamentally, we need an independent in D.C. We need someone who's grown up in the light of Maine common sense. My family has been in this state since before it was a state. We've been in this state since before we were a country. If you give me the honor of sending me to D.C., I'm going to serve you, the public of Maine. I'm not going to get involved in the petty disputes. I'm not going to be part of West Side Story as they pull back and forth. I'm not going to get involved in any of that. I'm going to go to serve you and put my knowledge of studying governments and the mistakes all over the world, whether it be Europe, it doesn't matter. All these things that are being proposed have been tried elsewhere and failed. So ultimately, vote Liberty, vote Dodge. I look forward to November 6th.
Mr. Woods, you have the final word. We do have less than a minute, please.
Thank you. I believe our greatest challenge is less about who we elect than how we, 1.3 million Mainers, get more engaged in our democracy. I think that's the real issue. I respect each and every one of the candidates here tonight. Each of them genuinely desire to help Maine. But in my opinion, only one person standing here is the most competent with the highest degree of integrity to represent all Mainers. His name is Angus King. As of tonight, I'm ending my campaign and asking my supporters to consider Angus King as Maine's next U.S. Senator. Thank you for the honor and privilege of being here, being a candidate to represent Maine. Thank you to my wife and family, and thank you all.
Thank you very much. There are no rebuttals allowed for closing statements. We're out of time, in fact. Appreciate everybody's time. Certainly a big thank you to the Lewiston Middle School, the Portland Press Herald, News Radio 560 WGAN, and all the candidates. Remember to vote Tuesday. Thanks so much. Jim, interesting lightning round. Never had that happen before. I should have perhaps
That was one of our